Welcome to Matters of Decorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. This is for you creative folks. All of us creative folks. You cannot be creative all the time. I know. I've tried. And I've got a number of issues with creativity at the moment, but even before I had brain damage and other associated difficulties, I couldn't be creative 100% of the time. No one can. This is full of coffee, by the way. Devin threw together it's coffee, espresso, and like 8 shots of espresso and ice, a little hazelnut creamer, and then topped up with cold brew. This is what it takes to kick me into operation anymore. It's not just the brain damage from the chemo and all this stuff. I could never be creative 100% of the time I wanted to be creative. That is because creativity is an effort. I mean, there's things I have to do today. There's things I need to write, and needing to write something is a really great way to make sure you're not going to write something. You do so much better when you want to write something, but then sometimes you have to wait for the want to come along. There's biology behind this. Creating things takes mental effort, and mental effort does break down to your brain is doing things. You're firing off synapses. You're trying to trigger your cell assemblies to start moving in those patterns that eventually translate into something being created. You're forging new neural networks and creating whole new connections. Creativity is not fully understood, but effort in the brain is pretty well. And you can't do it all the time. I cannot do chin-ups all the time. I can't do chin-ups. I can't do push-ups all the time. I can't run all the time. I can't create all the time. All of this is based on resources that your body has, or side effects and byproducts that your body generates as you're doing things that you got to clear out. In the case of doing creative things or mental effort of any kind, it's neurotransmitters. It's the chemicals that bridge the gaps between the synapses and tell the next synapses across the gap whether they're going to fire or whether they're going to stop firing. It's complex, but we have a limited amount of neurotransmitters at any point in time. The nerve cells produce it, but it takes time to produce those chemicals. And if you fire off absolutely everything that you've got in a massive creative effort, you can create amazing things, and then you're empty. You get empty. You go through these periods of creation and depletion where you're just not generating anything. You can't be creative all the time. And that sucks, because I really want to be creative all the time. There are things I want to do, things I want to see come into existence that don't exist yet. Products I want to make, or stories I want to tell, things I want to happen that don't happen if I can't be creative. So what do you do? When I was writing my novel, With a Single Wish Forever, link below, I would go through these periods where I could write a chapter in a day, or a couple of chapters across a couple of days, and it was magnificent, and then I would tank, and I had a really bad period where I'd been pushing myself very hard, and I was empty. So I learned how life insurance worked. I was in a program that was designed to get me to the point where I could sell life insurance. I can't, but I passed the state exam. Didn't have the little piece of paper with me that would have allowed me to have my license at that point. Probably for a good thing. I'm a terrible salesman, but I did love learning about how life insurance works. It was eye-opening and educational, and I went through this super intense 1 week course that was just hours a night, be there on time or don't bother showing up, go through all the guidelines and regulations a bit at a time until you get it all. Crammed it in my head, and it was amazing. And you wouldn't think learning life insurance is one of those exciting things, but it kind of was. It used a different section of my brain. It was so far away from anything that I had been doing creatively that I stimulated other parts, and that made the whole brain work a little bit harder and more efficiently. Well, we've got to move resources over to here for a little while so we can work on this concerted effort. It was a really great... Ask me about life insurance one of these days, if you really feel like it. It's not an entirely boring conversation, I promise. I'm taking classes. I took a semester off so I could catch up with some things this spring, but in fall I'm going back. Studying digital arts and computer animation and 3D modeling. I got a really good start. I need to get back to it because I have the problems in my brain. I have the damage. And the only way through it is to work around it and work through it and make your brain build new connections. And the creative effort is amazing for that, but sometimes you have to learn something. Education's amazing. As a kid, growing up, I didn't have to see the value in it that, well, no kid does, because it's what you have to do, not what you want to do. When you start learning things because you want to learn things, that's different. When you get those really great elective classes in college, popular literature of fantasy and horror, taught by Philip Schruffler, one of the best classes I have ever taken. Wasn't absolutely essential. I could have taken a number of different English courses, but it was eye-opening. I loved Lovecraft before that, but really being able to dig in and studying Lovecraft and Shelley and Stoker and Poe all in the same class and relating them to one another, oh, that was sexy. That worked for me in ways I can't begin to describe. And here I am beginning to describe them. You can't be creative all the time, but you can always be learning. And learning doesn't mean necessarily going to a classroom and sitting down while someone tells you things or while you work on exercises. My 3D modeling instructor would always tell us, well, okay, if you have a question, you can either email me, or if you want an answer faster, go to YouTube. There are tutorials all over YouTube. Go to YouTube, University of YouTube. And YouTube can be very educational. It can be not so educational. You've got to be careful what sources you go to. But I've learned a lot of interesting things from YouTube tutorials. What do you want to do today? What would you like to be able to create today? There are steps between here and there, and sometimes I pick something I can't do. I would really like to be able to create this kind of a graphic, but I do not have what it takes to do that yet. I've got a lot of tools. I collect tools for creating things in my computer. The Adobe Suite and 3ds Max, Poser. I have a handful of stuff I can make things with, and only the skill and knowledge to use maybe a tenth of the stuff to to use a pittance of what it's capable of doing. So every day I pick something I can't do. And I do not learn every day. I do not successfully pick up that skill every day, but I plug away at it. And that helps keep me creative. Creativity is an emptying out. It's where you're creating something and dumping it out, whether it's verbally or whether you're typing it out or creating pictures or drawing or acting or singing. It's a draining experience. It's rewarding. And when you get good feedback and you can see it out there in front of you as something that you've constructed, it's an amazing feeling. It does fulfill you while it's draining you. And you need to put something back in. Education is about the best way I can rapidly, with a certain amount of force and gusto, cram creative energy back into myself to rest the parts of my mind that are responsible for dumping things out by taking things in. YouTube. I have a slew of books all over this place that I still need to dig into and read up on. Learning a new game system. The latest Star Trek game that came out, the 2D20 system, has some really interesting components to it. I don't like it all, but I'm kind of learning to live with it. And that's learning a new system, using a new system, is really a good way to pump me up on using old systems or using my system. Learning a new recipe, trying a new recipe, cooking, the whole pickle and peanut butter thing did kind of stimulate me a bit as the things I wanted to do in the culinary world. Travel. Oh my God. Seeing new places or seeing old places with new people. Seeing stuff that you're familiar with that you don't see all the time, but through another set of eyes. One of the most valuable resources I have in the world for re-stimulating my brain is my ridiculously amazing son Andrew. Showing him things I have seen before and getting his reactions gives me a slightly askew viewpoint that lets me, like binocular vision. I've got my viewpoint, now I've got a slightly different viewpoint, and if I compare them, I get a much deeper view of what I'm looking at. Andrew helped me see Disneyland in a different way. Old movies that I really enjoy in different ways. The games that I write. He's in a couple of games that I'm running. And he shows up with this character and he's got, I want to do this with the character. I wrote this thing and I never thought of doing that. How would you do that? Is that how you did it? That's amazing, and I'm very proud if you can't tell. Andrew is taking, he's a 17, he's a junior in high school and carrying a full course load, and after school he is studying welding. I could not be a more proud father right now, because that is entirely voluntary. That's what he wants to do. He wants to certify as a welder. If I had had that kind of drive and determination and focus when I was his age, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. I'd be having a different one. All of which is to say, creativity, effort out, energy out, education and travel and finding new perspectives, using your brain in new ways. energy in, restoring the creativity. I like talking to people. I had some guests over yesterday that are I call them the kids I used to mentor, but they're hardly kids anymore. I performed the wedding ceremony for one of them, and they tell me their stories about where they've been and what games they've been playing and how their lives have been, and they hear mine, and I feel richer the next day for that and restored. I talk to people on Discord all the time. My patrons, actually, I have I'm running a game for exclusively for people who are on my Patreon. Hint, hint. And seeing how they have processed, the rules that I wrote, and the new ideas that they're coming up with, and the concepts, and it all kind of fills me with new perspective, brain operating in new ways, more creativity. Fills me back up. I got books to write. I got more books to write than I know I have to write, because I'm going to start writing on a book that I'm already writing on, and then another book is going to jump up and say, I need to be written. A novel or a novella or a picture or a comic, something is going to jump into my head and suggest itself. And I'll make a note and I'll keep writing, and then I'll have to get back to it. Creativity is exhausting. It's amazing. It's fulfilling. You just have to remember that there's a balance. I need caffeine. I need calories. I need education. I need stimulation, perspective, and viewpoints. I need travel. But if you put all these things together, then you can make amazing things. I don't care if you're sewing or knitting or writing a book or drawing pictures. There's a little bit of creativity in everyone. Even if you're focused on mathematics or accounting or things that are not generally considered terribly creative, you're still expending that creative energy to make something come into existence that hasn't existed before. Don't forget to fill back up, and don't feel too discouraged when you get to the end of a creative process and you can't start another one up right away, because you can't. No one can do that. You consider the 80s a terribly creative time in history. The 80s is also kind of the peak of cocaine usage. I have thought about it. I'm not going to. I'm not stupid, but it takes a stimulant to get my brain to fire off rapidly enough to make things happen right now. Caffeine's a good one. I might be using too much of it. What's it to you? Fill your head. Don't just keep emptying it, because that leads to all kinds of things. It leads to exhaustion and depression, and it's not the only reason for depression, but it certainly can cause it, and anxiety. And fill your head. Learn something. Learn something you have no reason to learn. Learn something for no reason other than to learn something. Become conversant in a subject you are not currently conversant in. Power tools or electronics or contract law. Don't necessarily become a lawyer, but at least be able to talk about it intelligently. We could use a little bit more intelligent discourse these days, and if you want to produce cogent thought and creative things, or even just produce something, a thought out of your head that you want to put in front of you, put some thoughts into. It seems really ridiculous in some ways, but calories in, calories out. If you're going to be doing a certain amount of work, you need to have a certain amount of energy in your system. If I'm going to be lifting weights, I need to protein load. If I'm going to be running a marathon, I need to have some complex carbs in my system. If I am going to be creating, I need to have some inspiration. And so do you. Well, thanks for following along in this particular creative rant. Now I need to go and learn something. I'm thinking about a couple of plugins for 3ds Max, actually. I'd really like to get my 3D modeling down before I get back to classes in the fall. Be that as it may, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you have your own ideas about how to fill yourself back up with creative energy or inspiration, if there's something else you'd like to hear me talk about, go ahead and leave me a comment. I love getting comments. You'll love leaving me one. If you're not subscribed to my videos already, why not? They're awesome. If you'd like to subscribe to them, please hit the subscribe button. If you do hit the subscribe button, hit the little notification bell so you're alerted as soon as I produce them. If you'd like to help out in a more meaningful way, I invite you to hit me at my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps and allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I am Scott Corum, this is what has mattered to me, and I will see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.